Your insecurity isn't a personal flaw. It's a weapon someone else built and you've been pointing it at yourself for years. Before we go further, if you're the type who actually wants to think deeply about power, psychology, and how to break free from invisible chains, hit subscribe. This isn't entertainment. It's ammunition. And I want to know, where are you listening from right now? Here's what most people get wrong about insecurity. They treat it like a character flaw, something broken inside them that needs fixing, a therapist's job, a self-help book's problem. But that's backwards. Insecurity isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. It's a control mechanism, a cage. And the most dangerous thing about a cage is that after a while, you forget you're in one. Think about how you were built. As a child, you learned something fundamental. Approval equals safety. In school, you got rewarded for giving teachers the answers they wanted to hear, not the truth. At home, you were praised when you behaved, punished when you deviated. In your social groups, you were accepted when you conformed, rejected when you stood out. Every institution, every system, every structure around you sent the same message. Your worth depends on other people's judgment. So you learned to monitor yourself obsessively. You became hyper-aware of how others perceived you. You started editing yourself in real time. You learned to make yourself smaller, quieter, less threatening. You learned to seek permission before taking action. You learned to apologize for existing. And here's the genius of the system. It worked. You became compliant, manageable, predictable, easy to control. But there was a cost. The cost was your actual self. Now you're an adult and that cage follows you everywhere. You sit in a meeting with an idea you've spent weeks developing, and when your moment comes, you hesitate. Your voice gets smaller. You frame it as a question instead of a statement. You apologize before you even speak. A less qualified person with genuine confidence says something similar, and the room listens to them. You watch it happen and feel invisible. You're in a relationship, and instead of expressing what you actually need, you soften your demands. You lower your standards. You make yourself smaller to avoid conflict. You become someone's emotional support system while your own needs slowly suffocate. And the worst part? You convince yourself this is love. This is sacrifice. This is what mature people do. You scroll through social media and feel a constant low-level anxiety. You curate your life for an audience of strangers. You edit your photos, soften your flaws, perform a version of yourself that doesn't actually exist. And every like feels like a small injection of validation that wears off in minutes, leaving you needing another hit. This isn't weakness. This is addiction. And like all addictions, it destroys you slowly, so gradually that you barely notice until you're completely dependent on external validation to feel okay about yourself. But here's what most people miss. Understanding the cage is only the first step. The real question is, what's on the other side? There are people who seem to operate on completely different rules. They take up space without apologizing. They express disagreement without fearing rejection. They make decisions based on their own values instead of seeking approval. They seem immune to judgment, unbothered, free. And we usually call this confidence, but that's not quite right. It's something deeper. It's indifference to whether you approve of them. That's the shift. Not confidence, indifference, not arrogance, irrelevance to others' judgment. And here's what might shock you. This isn't something you have to be born with. It's not a personality trait. It's a choice, a philosophy, a way of moving through the world that you can learn, practice, and eventually embody completely. Most of us don't even realize we're operating from a position of weakness because we've never experienced anything else. We've never tasted what it feels like to move through the world without constantly monitoring others' reactions. So let me show you exactly what that looks like. Picture a specific moment. You're in a professional environment. You've identified a problem that no one else seems to see. You have a solution. But before you speak, your mind runs a simulation. What if they think I'm overstepping? What if I'm wrong? What if they interpret this as arrogant? What if I embarrass myself? So you do what you've been trained to do. You soften your approach. You add a question mark to the end of a statement. You preface it with an apology. I might be wrong, but, or, this is probably not important, but you're literally telling people before you speak that you don't believe in what you're about to say. And here's where it gets darker. The moment you telegraph that lack of confidence, something shifts in how people perceive you. Not because your idea is actually weaker, but because you've told them it is. Confidence is contagious. So is uncertainty. When you present something with genuine conviction, not arrogance, but real confidence built on preparation, people listen differently. They take you seriously. Not because you're more intelligent, but because you believe in yourself. Now shift the scene. You're in a personal relationship. Maybe it's romantic, maybe it's with a family member, someone important to you, and they do something that violates your boundaries. Something small. Maybe they criticize you in front of others. Maybe they make a decision that affects you without asking. Maybe they minimize something you care about. In a healthy dynamic, you'd address it directly. But insecurity makes you do something different. You tell yourself it's not a big deal. You minimize it. You rationalize it. You think, if I make a fuss, they might leave. If I stand up for myself, I might lose them. So you swallow it. You smile. You pretend it didn't hurt. But here's what you're actually communicating. I don't respect myself enough to expect you to respect me. And people, whether consciously or unconsciously, respond to that message. They see someone who won't defend their own boundaries, and they begin to feel less respect, not more. They begin to push further. It's not malice. It's just the natural order. When someone demonstrates they don't value themselves, others rarely value them either. The relationship doesn't get better. It gets worse. Because every time you compromise your boundaries, you're teaching that person that your needs aren't important. And they start believing it. So they push further, and you compromise more. And the cycle tightens until you're a shadow of yourself, wondering how you got here. Now imagine a third scenario. You're navigating social spaces. Maybe it's social media, maybe it's a group chat, maybe it's a party. And you notice something. Certain people command attention without trying. They're not the loudest. They're not the most attractive. They're not the richest. But when they speak, people listen. When they set a boundary, people respect it. When they decline an invitation, no one tries to convince them. Why? Because they operate from a place of indifference. They're not desperate for the group's approval. They're not trying to be liked. They've already made peace with the fact that some people won't like them, and they've decided that's fine. So they move through these spaces differently. They don't perform. They don't edit themselves in real time. They don't apologize for their preferences or their boundaries. And paradoxically, this makes them more attractive, not less. People want to be around them more, not less. Because scarcity creates value. When someone isn't desperately seeking your approval becomes more valuable. But here's where most people get stuck. They see this dynamic and they try to fake it. They try to perform indifference. They try to act confident without actually changing anything internal. And it doesn't work. People can smell desperation even when it's wearing a mask of confidence. The performance always cracks eventually. The real shift, the one that actually works, is internal. It's fundamentally changing how you measure your own worth. As long as your self-esteem depends on others' judgment, you're building on quicksand. No amount of positive feedback will ever be enough because it's always temporary. No amount of achievement will ever be satisfying because there's always someone ahead of you. You'll always be running, always be anxious, always be checking over your shoulder. The insecure person is constantly asking, "Am I good enough?" And they're looking for the answer from everyone except themselves. That's the trap. That's the cage. The person operating from strength, from what we might call strength, has already answered that question for themselves. Not arrogantly, not based on fantasy, but based on honest assessment. I know what I'm capable of. I know my weaknesses. I know my worth. And I'm not asking you to validate that. I'm telling you what it is. And if you don't respect it, that's information about you, not about me. This is where most people fail in their attempt to break free. They understand the concept. They nod along. They feel motivated in the moment, but then they go back into their actual lives and nothing changes because they haven't done the work to actually shift this internal metric. They're still measuring themselves through others' eyes. They're still seeking approval. They're still asking permission to be themselves. And the system loves this. Because as long as you're looking outward for validation, you'll never look inward for power. As long as you need others' approval to feel okay, you're fundamentally dependent. And dependent people are controllable people. This is why the cage was built so carefully. It's not crude. It's elegant. It doesn't need locks. You voluntarily stay inside because you've been convinced that the outside is dangerous. That judgment is devastating. That rejection is unbearable. But what if you're wrong about that? What if judgment is actually irrelevant? What if rejection is just someone else saying they don't want what you're offering? What if you could simply not care? Here's what separates people who break free from insecurity and those who remain trapped forever. Most people understand the problem, but they don't understand the solution. They know the cage exists. They know they're in it. But they keep trying to escape through the bars instead of through the door that was always unlocked. The door requires 3 things. Not motivation, not therapy, not positive affirmations. 3 concrete, observable, measurable things that you can start building today. The first is competence. Real, undeniable, practical competence. This is where most self-help culture gets it wrong. They tell you to fake it till you make it. To act confident even when you're not. To wear the mask until the mask becomes the face. But here's the problem. People can smell a bluff. Confidence built on nothing is the most fragile thing in the world. One challenge, one question you can't answer, one moment where you're exposed and the whole structure collapses. But competence is different. Competence is armor that actually works. When you're genuinely skilled at something, when you've put in the work to actually know what you're doing, confidence isn't an act anymore. It's just the natural byproduct of knowing you can handle what's coming. Think about this. You're in a meeting and someone challenges your idea. If you're insecure and unprepared, you feel threatened. Your heart races, you get defensive, you stumble over your words. But if you're genuinely prepared, if you've thought through potential objections, if you know your material inside and out, then that same challenge is just data. It's an opportunity to demonstrate what you know. Your body language changes. Your tone changes. You're not performing confidence anymore. You're exhibiting it naturally because it's earned. This is why the insecure person rarely develops competence, because insecurity makes you defensive about learning. You avoid areas where you might be exposed as incompetent. You stay in your comfort zone. You don't take on difficult projects. You don't stretch yourself. And the longer you avoid challenge, the more incompetent you actually become, which reinforces your insecurity. It's a death spiral. Breaking free requires reversing this. It requires deliberately moving toward discomfort, toward areas where you're not yet competent, toward challenges that terrify you. Because that's where growth lives. That's where real confidence gets built. The second pillar is brutal self-knowledge. And by brutal, I mean something very specific. I mean the willingness to see yourself with the same cold, analytical eye that you'd use to examine a stranger. Most people are incapable of this. They're either brutally self-critical, obsessing over every flaw, real and imaginary, or they're delusional about themselves, blind to their actual limitations, while overestimating their capabilities. Neither of these is useful. What you need is truth, not harsh judgment, not false flattery, just accurate assessment. What are you actually good at? Not what do you wish you were good at? What are you demonstrably, measurably good at? What do you have evidence of success in? What are you actually bad at? Where do you consistently fail? Where do people give you feedback that you know, deep down, is accurate? Where are your genuine limitations? What are your values? Not the values you think you should have. Not the values your parents or society wants you to have. What do you actually care about? What actually matters to you when you're honest with yourself? The insecure person avoids this work because it's uncomfortable, but this is precisely where your power lives. When you know exactly what you're good at and what you're not, you stop playing pretend. You stop trying to be everything to everyone. You stop seeking approval in areas where you've already decided you're not competent anyway. And something strange happens. When you're honest about your limitations, people actually respect you more. because self-awareness is rare. Most people are either delusional or self-flagellating, and you're offering something different. Honest assessment. That's attractive. That's trustworthy. The third pillar is narrative control, and this is where people get confused. They think narrative control means lying, manipulation, creating a false version of yourself. But that's backwards. Narrative control means telling the truth about yourself strategically. You're already a character in a story. The question is, who's writing it? Are you allowing others to define you? Are you allowing people's perceptions of you, accurate or not, to become your identity? Or are you actively authoring your own narrative? Here's a concrete example. You make a mistake at work. Something visible, something people notice. Now there's a moment where the narrative is being written. The insecure person tries to minimize it. They make excuses. They blame external factors. They try to downplay it. But this looks defensive. It looks like they can't handle failure. So the narrative that gets written is, this person is fragile. This person can't take responsibility. Now imagine someone confident in their actual competence. Same mistake, but different response. They acknowledge it directly. I made an error. Here's what happened. Here's what I'm doing to prevent it next time. Done. No defensiveness, no excuses, no minimizing, just straightforward ownership. The narrative that gets written is completely different. This person takes responsibility. This person learns. This person is reliable. Same fact. Different narrative. Different outcome. But here's where it gets sophisticated. Narrative control isn't just about how you respond to negative situations. It's about actively presenting your strengths without apology. Most insecure people wait for permission to talk about what they're good at. They hope someone will notice. They wait for an invitation to show their competence. But confident people don't wait. They present their work. They talk about their accomplishments. They share their ideas. They do this without arrogance. They're just visible. The insecure person thinks this is rude, immodest, attention-seeking. But the secure person has figured out something crucial. If you don't tell your story, other people will tell it for you. And they'll get it wrong. They'll minimize you. They'll underestimate you. They'll create a narrative of you that serves their interests, not yours. When you control your narrative, you're not being arrogant. You're just not allowing others to define you. You're taking responsibility for how you're perceived. And here's the dark truth. In a world where everyone is competing for attention and resources and status, the person who doesn't actively manage their own narrative is the person who gets managed by others. These three pillars, competence, self-knowledge, narrative control, they're not separate. They work together. Real competence gives you something to be confident about. Self-knowledge tells you exactly where to build that competence. And narrative control ensures that your competence actually translates into how people perceive you and treat you. But here's the final piece that most people miss. These three pillars are all things you can control. They're not dependent on others. They're not dependent on luck or genetics or circumstances. They're entirely within your power. You can get competent. You can get honest with yourself. You can get strategic about your narrative. No permission required. No external validation needed. This is why understanding this actually breaks the cage, because you realize that your insecurity was never actually about external factors. It was never about whether people would like you or approve of you or judge you. It was always about you abdicating responsibility for these three areas. It was always about waiting for someone else to give you permission to be confident. It was always about seeking the validation that only you can actually provide. The moment you shift from seeking approval to building these three pillars, everything changes. But before we go further, we need to be honest about something. You're not trapped by accident. You didn't end up in this cage because of bad luck or circumstance. You ended up here because of specific choices you've been making. And until you understand those choices, until you see exactly what you're doing wrong, you can't stop doing it. The first mistake is obvious, but nobody says it clearly. You're seeking approval when you should be building respect. These are not the same thing. Approval is emotional. It's based on whether someone likes you. Respect is behavioral. It's based on whether someone values your competence and integrity. And here's the problem. Approval is addictive. But it's also unstable. Someone can approve of you today and disapprove tomorrow. Their mood changes. Their circumstances change. Their opinion of you shifts based on factors completely outside your control. So if your self-esteem is built on approval, your life becomes a constant anxiety machine. You're always checking, always monitoring, always trying to figure out if you still have their approval. But respect? Respect is built on observable reality. If you're competent, if you have integrity, if you deliver on your promises, people respect that. It doesn't fluctuate based on their mood. It doesn't disappear because they met someone new. It's solid. Yet the insecure person is obsessed with approval. They're constantly performing, constantly trying to be likable, constantly softening their edges to avoid conflict. And here's what this communicates. I need you to like me more than I need to respect myself. And when people hear that message, and they always do, they stop respecting you. The second mistake is that you're communicating through weakness instead of through strength. Pay attention to how you speak. Notice the words. Notice the cadence. When you're insecure, your language betrays you. You turn statements into questions. You add qualifiers that undermine yourself. I might be wrong, but this is probably stupid, but I'm no expert, but every single qualifier is you apologizing in advance for having the audacity to speak. Every question mark at the end of a statement is you asking permission, and people hear it. Not consciously, maybe, but they hear it. Your uncertainty becomes their uncertainty. Your hesitation becomes their doubt. You're literally infecting the room with insecurity. But there's something else happening too. You're not just communicating weakness in your words. You're communicating it in your body, in your posture, in your facial expressions. The insecure person takes up less space. They sit slightly hunched. They make less eye contact. They smile when they're nervous. They laugh at their own jokes to diffuse tension. They lower their voice to seem less threatening. Every single one of these is a tell. Every single one is you communicating, I don't believe in myself. And here's the thing about human psychology. People are incredibly attuned to these signals. It's part of our survival instinct. We can detect weakness. We can sense desperation. And when we detect it, something shifts. Not consciously, but we start treating that person differently. We start to devalue them. We start to feel less obligated to respect their boundaries. It's not cruelty, it's just the natural order. The third mistake is that you're dependent on external sources of validation that you can never control. Think about how your self-esteem is built right now. How many of its foundations are dependent on things outside your control? Your income, dependent on your employer, the economy, circumstances. Your appearance, dependent on genetics, age, other people's aesthetic preferences. Your romantic relationships, dependent on another person's feelings, which can change. Your social status, dependent on what other people think, which shifts constantly. Your professional recognition, dependent on other people noticing and valuing your work. When you build your self-esteem on these externals, you've essentially handed over the keys to your own happiness to other people. You're a puppet dependent on others pulling your strings, and puppets are always anxious because the strings can be cut at any moment. The fourth mistake is that you're living reactively instead of proactively. The insecure person wakes up without a clear sense of direction. They check their phone and react to what other people want. They go to work and react to what their boss demands. They interact with others and react to the mood in the room. They're constantly in response mode, constantly adjusting, constantly trying to figure out what others need and how to provide it. Their entire day is a series of reactions to external stimuli. But the person operating from strength wakes up with a plan. They know their goals. They know their values. They know what they're trying to build. They still respond to circumstances, but their responses are strategic. They're aligned with their larger vision. They're not random adjustments to whatever external pressure appears. This is a fundamental difference in how you move through the world. The reactive person is a leaf blowing in the wind. The proactive person is a ship with a destination, adjusting sails but never losing sight of where they're going. The fifth mistake, and this one is particularly dark, is that you're allowing yourself to be easily manipulated because you're trying to please everyone. This is the thing that most people don't want to admit. But it's true. When you're desperate for approval, you're easy to manipulate. Someone criticizes you and you immediately try to change to accommodate them. Someone expresses disappointment and you feel responsible for fixing it. Someone withdraws attention and you panic and try to earn it back. You become completely reactive to other people's emotional states. And predatory people, and there are more of them than you think, they recognize this instantly. They see someone desperate for approval and they know exactly how to exploit it. They use approval as a reward for compliance. They withdraw it as punishment. They create a cycle of intermittent reinforcement that keeps you addicted. This isn't paranoia. This is just reality. In every environment, there are people trying to extract value. If you're advertising that you'll change yourself to avoid their disapproval, you're marking yourself as easy prey. The sixth mistake is that you've accepted the false premise that you should care what most people think. Here's a statistical reality. Most people are mediocre. Most people are trapped in their own insecurity. Most people aren't thinking about you nearly as much as you think they are. They're too preoccupied with their own fears and their own status anxieties. The amount of mental real estate that people are actually dedicating to judging you is microscopic. But you're acting as if a jury of thousands is constantly evaluating you. As if every action you take is being scrutinized and judged. As if you need to maintain perfect likability at all times. You've created an imaginary tribunal in your mind that doesn't actually exist. And the people whose opinions might actually matter, the people you genuinely respect, whose values align with yours, they're usually not the ones you're most afraid of. You're usually afraid of the judgment of strangers, the judgment of people you don't even like, the judgment of people whose own lives are a mess and whose opinions have no real weight. This is insane when you think about it clearly. But that's what insecurity does. It makes you give tremendous power to the opinions of people who don't deserve it. The seventh mistake is the one that locks everything else in place. You're waiting for permission that will never come. You're waiting for someone to tell you that you're good enough, that you're competent enough, that you deserve to take up space, that you're allowed to express your opinions, that you can be ambitious, that you're worthy of respect, and you're waiting for this permission from people who don't have the authority to grant it, from people who are just as uncertain and insecure as you are. Permission doesn't work that way. There is no moment where someone official taps you on the shoulder and says, "Okay, you're officially confident now." There's no graduation ceremony where you receive your diploma in self-respect. There's no external authority that can grant you the right to believe in yourself. That's something you have to take, unilaterally, without asking, without waiting. And the moment you decide to take it, the moment you stop waiting for permission and start operating from your own authority, everything changes. Because the truth that insecurity prevents you from seeing is this: you already have the permission. You've always had it. You're just waiting for someone else to tell you that you do. Now we get to the part that most people don't want to hear. Because understanding the cage is one thing, but understanding that you're actively maintaining it, that you're the one keeping the lock sealed, that's something different. That's where the real work begins. The conflict isn't between you and the world. The conflict is between who you are and who you've decided to become. And you've been losing this war because you don't even realize you're fighting it. Let's be specific about what you're doing wrong. What you're actively, consciously choosing to do every single day that keeps you trapped. First, you're prioritizing comfort over growth. Growth happens at the edge of your competence. It happens when you attempt something that might fail, when you speak up despite uncertainty, when you challenge yourself beyond what's comfortable. This is where actual confidence gets built. This is where you discover what you're actually capable of. But the insecure person avoids this at all costs. They stay in their comfort zone. They do what they know. They avoid situations where they might be exposed as incompetent. They choose the safe path. They say yes to what's familiar and no to what's challenging. And because they never push themselves, they never discover their actual capabilities. They remain convinced they're weaker and less capable than they actually are. The cage reinforces itself. Second, you're accepting other people's definitions of who you are. Someone tells you that you're not creative, and you believe them. Someone tells you that you're not good at public speaking, and you organize your entire life around avoiding public speaking. Someone tells you that you're not ambitious, and you lower your expectations. You've let other people's judgments become your identity, and now you're defending that identity like it's sacred truth. But these are just opinions. Opinions from people who don't know you. People who are interpreting your actions through their own biases and limitations. People who might be right, might be wrong, but whose judgment has no authority over who you actually are or who you can become. Yet you've handed them that authority. You've let their opinions become your self-concept. Third, you're performing instead of being. Every interaction is a performance for you. You're constantly monitoring how you're coming across. You're editing yourself in real time. You're saying what you think people want to hear instead of what you actually think. You're being who you think you should be instead of who you actually are. And this takes enormous energy. It's exhausting. It's also ineffective because people can sense the performance. They can feel the inauthenticity. But more importantly, when you're constantly performing, you never actually connect with anyone. You're always at a distance, always maintaining the mask. And loneliness follows. Because people aren't connecting with you. They're connecting with the character you're playing. And that character isn't real. Fourth, you're catastrophizing every minor setback. You make a small mistake and you immediately construct a narrative where this means you're incompetent. Someone doesn't respond to your message and you assume it means they don't like you. You say something awkward and you spend hours replaying it, convinced that everyone noticed and now they all judge you. You're taking normal, inevitable parts of human interaction and you're transforming them into evidence of your fundamental inadequacy. This is particularly insidious because it creates a feedback loop. The catastrophizing causes anxiety. The anxiety affects your performance in future interactions. Your reduced performance seems to confirm your catastrophic narratives, so you catastrophize more, and the cage gets tighter. Fifth, you're choosing people-pleasing over boundary setting. You say yes to things you don't want to do. You suppress your needs to accommodate others. You accept treatment you wouldn't accept from anyone else because you're afraid of the consequences of setting boundaries. And every time you do this, you're teaching people that your boundaries don't matter, that your needs are negotiable, that you can be pushed around. But more importantly, you're teaching yourself the same thing. You're internalizing the message that other people's comfort matters more than your integrity, that you should sacrifice yourself to keep the peace, that your role in relationships is to accommodate, not to be respected. Sixth, you're measuring yourself against impossible standards. You compare yourself to people at the peak of their abilities with years of experience, with advantages you don't have. And you compare yourself to the highlight reel of their lives, not their actual reality. Someone else seems effortlessly confident. You assume it's because they're naturally that way. You don't consider that they've spent years building that confidence. You don't see the struggle underneath. You just see the final product, and you feel inadequate. And because you're comparing yourself to an impossible standard, you never feel like you're good enough. No matter what you accomplish, there's always someone doing it better. No matter how much you improve, there's always a higher standard to chase, so you're constantly failing in your own mind. And this failure confirms your insecurity. Seventh, and this is the darkest one, you're addicted to your own insecurity. This is the thing that keeps people trapped even after they understand the cage. Because insecurity has become familiar. It's become your identity. It's your excuse for why you haven't done the things you wanted to do. It's your protection against trying because if you don't try, you can't fail. It's your explanation for every disappointment. I was too insecure. That's why it didn't work. Insecurity is also, paradoxically, a form of control. Because when you believe you're fundamentally inadequate, the world becomes predictable. You know what will happen. You know you'll fail. You know you won't be chosen. You know you won't be good enough. This is horrible, but it's also safe in a weird way. At least you're not surprised. Real confidence is terrifying by comparison, because it requires accepting the possibility of success. It requires acknowledging that you might actually be capable of more than you've allowed yourself to attempt. It requires accepting responsibility for your own life instead of blaming insecurity for holding you back. Eighth, you're confusing insecurity with wisdom. You tell yourself that your self-doubt is actually prudence, that your hesitation is actually caution, that your fear is actually realistic assessment of danger. You've convinced yourself that insecurity is protecting you, but it's not. It's paralyzing you. Real wisdom isn't self-doubt. Real wisdom is accurate assessment. It's knowing what you can do and what you can't. It's understanding risk without being paralyzed by it. It's being cautious without being cowardly. Insecurity pretends to be wisdom, but it's the opposite. It's prejudgment. It's assuming failure before you've even tried. Ninth, you're accepting scarcity as your default state. You operate as if there's only one opportunity, and if you miss it, you'll never get another. As if there's only one person who could ever love you, and if they reject you, you'll be alone forever. As if there's only one path to success, and if you fail on it, your life is over. This scarcity mindset makes you desperate, and desperation is the death of power. But the reality is different. There are always more opportunities. There are always other people. There are always alternative paths. The only reason you're operating from scarcity is because you've chosen to. You've decided to stake your entire sense of worth on a single outcome. And because that outcome is uncertain, you're constantly anxious. 10th, you're not taking responsibility for your own narrative. You're waiting for someone to notice you, to recognize your value, to give you a role in their story. But nobody is coming. Nobody is going to hand you success or confidence or respect. These are things you have to take. You have to tell your story. You have to present your work. You have to communicate your value, and most people won't because they're too busy with their own insecurities. But you keep waiting, hoping, expecting that someday someone will see what you're worth without you having to tell them. And that day never comes. Meanwhile, less qualified people who actually communicate their value are getting the opportunities, the relationships, the recognition that you think you deserve. And you're left wondering why the world isn't fair. The world isn't unfair. You're just invisible because you're choosing to be. Here's what all of this comes down to. You're not trapped by circumstances. You're trapped by choices. And the beautiful and terrifying thing about that is, you can make different choices. Not tomorrow. Not when you feel more confident. Now. Today. Right now. The cage was never locked. You've just been standing inside it, waiting for someone to open the door that was always open. The door has always been there. You're just finally looking at it clearly enough to see it. So what would a Stoic actually tell you? What would someone who has truly understood human nature say about escaping this trap? The first thing they'd tell you is this. You've been asking the wrong question your entire life. You've been asking, how do I get people to approve of me? How do I become likable? How do I make sure no one judges me? These are the questions of someone still inside the cage, still seeking permission from the world. And they're unanswerable questions because approval is not something you can control. Judgment is inevitable. Not everyone will like you. This is not a problem to solve. It's a reality to accept. The Stoic asks a completely different question. What is actually within my control? And the answer is brutally simple. Your thoughts, your effort, your integrity, your values, your actions. That's it. Everything else, other people's opinions, outcomes you can't influence, circumstances you didn't choose, these are outside your control. And the moment you stop trying to control them, your anxiety begins to dissolve. Think about this. Why are you anxious about what people think? Because you're trying to control something you can't control. You're trying to manage everyone's perception of you. You're trying to guarantee that everyone likes you. You're trying to prevent all judgment. All impossible. So you're in a constant state of anxiety trying to accomplish the impossible. And the Stoic solution is radical in its simplicity. Stop trying. Not stop trying to be good. Not stop trying to be competent. Not stop trying to have integrity. Keep doing all of that. But stop trying to control whether people appreciate it. Stop trying to guarantee their approval. Stop trying to manage their perception. Do your work. Be honest. Act with integrity. And then let the chips fall where they may. The second thing a Stoic would tell you is that confidence is not the opposite of fear. This is where most people misunderstand Stoicism. They think it means becoming fearless. But that's not it. Stoics are not fearless. They're afraid all the time. They're terrified of failure, rejection, and death like everyone else. The difference is that they don't let fear dictate their actions. This is the actual definition of courage. It's not the absence of fear. It's action despite fear. It's making a decision based on your values and then executing it even though you're uncertain about the outcome. The insecure person waits for the fear to go away. They wait until they're certain. They wait until they feel confident. They wait for permission. But the Stoic understands that certainty never comes. Fear doesn't disappear. Confidence isn't a prerequisite for action. It's a consequence of action. So you don't wait for confidence. You act, and confidence emerges from that action. You present your ideas even though you're nervous. You take the risk even though you're uncertain. You set the boundary even though you're afraid of the consequence. And then, afterward, you discover that you survived. The worst thing didn't happen. You were stronger than you thought. And your confidence grows incrementally with each action. The third thing a Stoic would tell you is that you need to radically redefine what success actually means. Because right now you're measuring success by external metrics. How many people like you? How much money you make? How attractive you are? How much status you have? And because these are all dependent on factors partially outside your control, you're constantly experiencing failure in your own mind. You can do everything right and still not get the approval you're seeking. You can work hard and still not make enough money. You can be genuinely good and still be judged unfairly. So you're always failing by your own metrics. But the Stoic redefines success entirely. Success is doing your work with integrity. Success is making your best effort. Success is living according to your values regardless of the outcome. Success is something entirely within your control. So you can succeed even if you fail. You can win even if you lose. Because success is not about what happens to you. It's about what you do. This is profoundly liberating because it means you can't actually fail anymore. You can attempt something and it doesn't work out. But if you approached it with integrity, with effort, with competence, then you succeeded. You did what was within your power to do. The outcome is not in your control. So you don't judge yourself by the outcome. You judge yourself by your effort. The fourth thing a Stoic would tell you is that other people's judgments are fundamentally irrelevant to your worth. Your worth is intrinsic. It comes from being human. It doesn't increase when someone approves of you. It doesn't decrease when someone judges you. It's constant, unchanging, not dependent on external validation. This sounds obvious, but it's actually revolutionary because it means you can stop trying to prove your worth. You can stop performing. You can stop seeking evidence of your value from other people. Because here's the dark truth. You will never find that evidence. You can accomplish everything and someone will still judge you. You can be beautiful and someone will find fault. You can be successful and someone will resent you. You can be good and someone will interpret it as weakness. No external evidence will ever be sufficient to convince you of your own worth if you don't already believe it internally. So the Stoic stops looking for that evidence. They accept their worth as a given. And from that place, they're free. Free from the constant need to justify themselves. Free from the anxiety of wondering if they're good enough. Free from the desperation of seeking approval. The fifth thing a Stoic would tell you is that you need to distinguish between what deserves your attention and what doesn't. Most of your anxiety is about things that don't actually matter. Someone didn't respond to your message. What does that actually tell you? Nothing. It could mean anything. Their phone died. They were busy. They forgot. They didn't see it. Maybe it does mean they don't like you, but so what? That's information about them, not about you. Yet you're spinning stories. You're catastrophizing. You're creating a narrative out of nothing. The Stoic practices ruthless triage. What actually matters? Your health, your integrity, your ability to do your work, your relationships with people who matter. That's what deserves your attention and your energy. Everything else is noise. The judgment of strangers, the opinion of people you don't respect, the approval of systems that don't deserve it. All noise, all distracting you from what actually matters. The sixth thing a Stoic would tell you is that you need to embrace the reality of your own mortality. This might seem dark, but it's actually the most liberating realization. You're going to die. Probably decades from now, but it's coming. And when you're on your deathbed, none of this will matter. You won't care what that person thought of you. You won't care if someone judged you. You won't care if you weren't perfect. What you'll care about is whether you lived authentically, whether you pursued what mattered to you, whether you had integrity, whether you loved the people in your life, whether you did your work. This reality fundamentally changes your priorities, because insecurity becomes absurd when you zoom out to that perspective. You're spending years of your finite life worrying about the fleeting judgment of people you'll forget about. You're sacrificing your authenticity for the temporary approval of strangers. You're dying inside to avoid external discomfort. It's completely backwards. The Stoic uses this reality as a motivation. It's not depressing, it's clarifying. If you're going to be here for a limited time, then you should spend it doing things that matter. Being authentic, pursuing what you believe in, expressing what you actually think, not performing, not seeking approval, actually living. This is what the Stoic would tell you. Not that you need to feel more confident, not that you need to be liked more, not that you need to become more perfect, but that you need to fundamentally change what you're measuring yourself by. You need to stop trying to control the uncontrollable. You need to distinguish between what matters and what's noise. You need to embrace the reality of your finitude. And from that foundation, you build something real. Now let's talk about what this looks like in your actual life. Because philosophy is beautiful, but it's useless if it doesn't translate into action. Let's get specific about where insecurity is destroying you right now. Where it's costing you money, relationship, status, peace of mind. Start with money. The insecure person negotiates from a position of weakness. They sit down at a salary negotiation, and they're already apologizing. They're thinking, I'm lucky to have this job. I should be grateful. I shouldn't push too hard. And so they accept less than they're worth. Not because they're stupid, but because they're terrified of the consequence of asking for what they deserve. A woman is worth $50,000 a year, but she accepts $45,000 because she doesn't believe she deserves more. A man turns down a promotion because he's convinced he's not ready, even though he's more qualified than the person who got it. Someone builds a business but underprices it because they don't truly believe it's valuable. Over a lifetime, insecurity costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not because you're not talented, but because you won't claim your value. And here's the thing. Your employer is betting on your insecurity. They're counting on the fact that you won't leave, that you won't negotiate hard, that you'll accept whatever they offer, because you're afraid the alternative is worse. Your insecurity makes you a perfect employee from their perspective. Obedient, grateful, unlikely to demand more. So they pay you less than you're worth and pocket the difference. But it doesn't stop there. Insecurity also affects how you spend money, because you're using money as a compensation for low self-worth. You buy things you don't need to convince yourself you're valuable. You spend money on status symbols because you believe status will somehow make up for your internal sense of inadequacy. You make financial decisions from a place of fear instead of strategy. So you overpay for things. You invest in the wrong opportunities. You make impulsive purchases to feel better. Now, shift to relationships. Insecurity is the death of genuine connection. Because when you're insecure, you're not actually present in the relationship. You're monitoring. You're performing. You're constantly evaluating whether the other person still approves of you. You're hypervigilant to any sign of disapproval. You're making compromises you don't want to make. You're suppressing your actual self to be who you think they want you to be. And the other person feels this. They sense the inauthenticity. They feel the desperation, and it repels them. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because authentic connection requires both people to be actually present. If you're performing and monitoring and managing their perception, there's no real connection happening. There's just two people pretending. So you end up in relationships where you're never truly seen, where you're never truly valued, where the other person is responding to the character you're playing, not to you. And you spend years wondering why the relationship feels empty, even though technically everything is fine. It's because nothing is actually real. For people in romantic relationships, this manifests as neediness. You text too much. You need constant reassurance. You get anxious when they don't respond immediately. You interpret their distance as rejection. You've given them the power to determine your emotional state, and now they're responsible for managing your insecurity, which is exhausting, which eventually drives them away. For people not in romantic relationships, insecurity creates a different problem. They're terrified of rejection, so they don't put themselves out there. They don't ask people on dates. They don't approach the person they're interested in. They wait for certainty that never comes. And years pass, and they wonder why they're alone. Not because they're unlovable, but because they never tried. The status game is where insecurity becomes truly toxic, because insecurity creates this desperate need to prove your worth through external markers, through job titles, through how much money you make, through where you live, through what car you drive, through followers on social media. You're constantly competing, constantly comparing, constantly trying to accumulate proof that you're valuable. But here's the thing. There's always someone with a better title, someone making more money, someone living in a nicer place, someone with more followers. So you're on a treadmill that never stops. You reach one level of achievement, and instead of being satisfied, you just move the goalpost higher, because the achievement was never actually about the achievement. It was about trying to prove your worth. And if your worth was proven, you wouldn't need to keep proving it. This is why successful people often still feel like frauds, why celebrities still struggle with insecurity, why wealthy people sometimes feel empty, because they were chasing external markers, thinking those markers would fix their internal sense of inadequacy. But they don't. You can accomplish everything and still feel empty if you haven't addressed the insecurity underneath. Social media is basically insecurity weaponized and monetized. The entire platform is built on your need for external validation. You post something and you're immediately checking how many likes it got. You're reading the comments looking for approval. You're comparing your behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. And the algorithm knows this, so it's designed to keep you addicted to this cycle of seeking validation. The insecure person is a perfect user because they're desperate. They're curating their life for an audience. They're performing a version of themselves that doesn't exist. They're creating content designed to get likes instead of content they actually care about. And they're slowly losing touch with who they actually are in the process. And burnout. Oh, burnout is almost entirely rooted in insecurity. Because the person experiencing burnout is usually someone who has been trying to prove their worth through work. Someone who hasn't set boundaries. Someone who says yes to everything because they're afraid that saying no will make them seem uncommitted. Someone who equates their value as a human with their productivity. So they work 60-hour weeks. They bring work home. They check their emails at midnight. They sacrifice their health, their relationships, their mental health, their actual life. And for what? To prove something to people who don't actually care. To gain approval that's never going to be sufficient. To maintain a level of performance that's unsustainable. And the cruelest part is that burnout often destroys the very thing that was supposed to save them. Their career suffers. Their health gets damaged. Their relationships fall apart. And suddenly the thing they were sacrificing everything for is gone anyway. And they're left with nothing. This is what insecurity costs you. Not just in abstract terms, but in actual, measurable, concrete ways. In money. In genuine relationships. In time wasted chasing status. In your mental health destroyed by social media addiction. In your body destroyed by work-related stress. In years of your finite life spent performing instead of living. The question isn't whether you can afford to break free from insecurity. The question is whether you can afford not to. Let's be honest about something. The truth about breaking free from insecurity isn't inspirational. It's not going to make you feel good. There's no moment where you suddenly feel confident and everything changes. That's the lie that self-help culture has been selling you. The actual truth is much darker and much more useful. Hard truth. 1. You will never feel ready. This is the fundamental lie that's keeping you trapped. You're waiting for a moment where you feel confident enough, prepared enough, ready enough. You're waiting for the anxiety to go away, for the self-doubt to disappear, for certainty to arrive. But it's not coming. Confidence doesn't precede action. Confidence follows action. You don't wait until you feel ready. You act, and then you discover you're capable. The waiting is just another form of cowardice masquerading as prudence. Every single person who has accomplished anything significant did it while feeling terrified, while feeling unprepared, while feeling inadequate. They didn't feel ready, they just moved forward anyway. And you can do the same, but only if you stop waiting for permission from your own nervous system. Hard truth. 2. Most people don't think about you nearly as much as you think they do. Your insecurity is based on the assumption that people are constantly judging you, evaluating you, thinking about you. But the truth is much more humbling and liberating. Most people are too preoccupied with their own insecurities to spend much mental energy on you. That person you're convinced is judging you, they're probably worrying about what someone else thinks of them. The colleague you're terrified of disappointing, they're probably anxious about their own performance. The group you're afraid won't accept you, they're probably all worried about whether the group accepts them. Everyone is trapped in their own head. Everyone is running their own insecurity narrative. And you're a minor character in their story at best. This should be liberating. You're spending tremendous energy managing the perception of people who are barely thinking about you. You're performing for an audience that isn't actually watching. Hard truth 3. The people whose approval actually matters will respect you more if you stop seeking their approval. There's a fundamental paradox here. The more desperately you seek someone's approval, the less they're inclined to give it. Because desperation signals weakness. It signals that you don't believe in yourself. And weak people are not attractive, romantic, or respectable. But the moment you stop seeking their approval, the moment you demonstrate that you're fine regardless of whether they approve, something shifts. Suddenly you become more attractive, more interesting, more valuable. Because you're no longer dependent on them. You have options, you have alternatives, you have self-respect. And these are the things that actually generate respect from others. So the path to getting respect from the people who matter is counterintuitively to stop caring whether they respect you, to build your life in such a way that you don't need their approval, to become so competent, so self-sufficient, so clear about your values that their approval becomes irrelevant. And then paradoxically, they give it to you freely. Hard truth 4. Some people will dislike you regardless of what you do. And that's not a problem to solve. There are people who will dislike you, people who will judge you, people who will interpret your actions uncharitably, people who will resent you, and there's nothing you can do to change their mind. You could be perfect, and they'd still find something wrong. You could perform exactly as they want, and they'd resent you for being too accommodating. You could try desperately to win them over, and they'd despise you for the desperation. Some people are simply not going to like you. And the insecure person wastes enormous energy trying to convert these people, trying to prove themselves, trying to find the magic formula that will make everyone accept them. But it's a waste. It's chasing ghosts. The healthier approach is to accept that this is normal. It's not a reflection on your worth. It's just reality. Some people will like you. Some won't. And you don't need everyone to like you. You need enough people who respect you and share your values. That's all. Hard truth 5. The version of yourself that you think you need to be doesn't actually exist. You have a fantasy about who you should be. A more confident version, a more accomplished version, a more likable version, a version that never makes mistakes, a version that everyone approves of. And you're constantly comparing the real you to this fantasy. And the real you always comes up short. But here's the thing. That fantasy version doesn't exist. It's not a realistic person. It's a collection of qualities that are actually contradictory. You can't be both perfectly authentic and universally likable. You can't be both ambitious and humble. You can't be both vulnerable and invulnerable. You can't please everyone. Real people are contradictions. Real people are flawed. Real people make mistakes and disappoint people and have limitations. The sooner you accept that the fantasy version of you doesn't exist and stop trying to become it, the sooner you can actually become a real, functional, powerful version of yourself. These are the hard truths, not the comforting ones, not the ones that make you feel motivated for an hour, but the ones that actually set you free if you're willing to accept them. Because once you accept these truths, you can stop wasting energy on things that don't matter. You can focus on what actually matters. On building competence. On developing integrity. On becoming someone whose opinion of themselves matters more than everyone else's opinions combined. That's the actual path out of insecurity. Not feeling better, but thinking differently. So we arrive at the moment where everything we've discussed converges into something actionable. Not a motivational speech. Not a temporary hit of inspiration that fades by tomorrow. But a crystallized understanding of what needs to happen next. The insecurity that's been controlling you was never actually about your competence. It was never about your appearance. It was never about whether people like you. It was about you handing over your power to external sources. It was about you waiting for permission from people who don't have it to give. It was about you building your identity on quicksand instead of on the rock of your own values and integrity. But here's what changes everything. That permission you've been waiting for doesn't exist. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can stop waiting. The sooner you can start building. The sooner you can start acting. The sooner you can start becoming the person who isn't waiting for approval, because their approval comes from within. This is the final lesson. This is where the theoretical becomes practical. This is where you stop reading about liberation and start practicing it. The cage has always been open. You've been standing outside it for years, locked in by chains that only you were holding. The realization is simple. The application is harder, because it requires you to do something terrifying. It requires you to take responsibility for your own life. It requires you to stop blaming insecurity for holding you back. It requires you to stop waiting and start moving. And the beautiful part? You can start today. Right now. Not next week when you're more prepared. Not next month when circumstances are better. Not next year when you've thought about it more. Today, this moment, this is where the change begins. Not in grand gestures, but in small actions driven by clarity instead of fear. You now understand the cage. You understand how you built it. You understand what it's costing you. You understand how to escape it. The only remaining question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to go back to your comfortable prison? Or are you going to walk through the door that was always open? The answer will define everything that comes next. Now comes the moment that matters most. Because understanding is one thing. But understanding without reflection is just entertainment. The real transformation happens when you turn these ideas inward. When you stop being a passive observer and become someone who actually interrogates their own life. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Not rhetorical questions designed to make you feel inspired, but genuine questions that deserve genuine answers. Questions that will either catalyze real change or confirm that you're not ready yet. Either way, you'll know the truth. First question, what are you actually sacrificing right now to maintain the approval of people you don't even respect? Think about this carefully. Not in abstract terms, but in concrete reality. What are you doing right now that you don't actually want to do? What are you saying yes to when you mean no? What are you pretending to believe? What are you hiding about yourself? What dreams have you abandoned? What boundaries have you compromised? What relationships are you maintaining out of obligation instead of genuine connection? What work are you doing that doesn't align with your actual values? What version of yourself are you performing? Now ask yourself, who am I doing this for? Who is this performance for? And do I actually respect their opinion? Do these people deserve this power over my life? If you're honest, most of the time the answer is no. You're sacrificing your actual self for the approval of people whose judgment you wouldn't trust in any other context. You're letting mediocre people dictate your choices. You're giving away your life in exchange for approval that you don't even value. That's the first question to sit with. Because until you see clearly what you're sacrificing, you won't have the motivation to stop. Second question, who in your life is being negatively affected by your insecurity? This is the one that usually hits hardest. Because you think your insecurity is just your problem, your burden to carry, your internal struggle. But it's not. It spreads. It contaminates everyone around you. The people who love you are affected by it. Your children are learning it from you. Your partner is feeling your anxiety. Your friends are picking up on your desperation for validation. Your colleagues are experiencing the effects of your hesitation and doubt. When you're insecure, you make decisions that affect other people. You might stay in a job that makes you miserable, which affects your family's emotional environment. You might avoid difficult conversations, which creates tension and distance in relationships. You might model insecurity for your children, teaching them to doubt themselves the way you doubt yourself. You might be so focused on getting approval that you neglect the people who actually matter to you. You might be so anxious about failure that you never attempt the things that could transform your life and your family's life. Your insecurity isn't a victimless internal struggle. It's actively harming the people around you. And they're not harming you by wanting you to be confident. They're trying to reach someone who is trapped inside their own head. This question isn't meant to make you feel guilty. It's meant to make you recognize that breaking free from insecurity isn't selfish. It's actually an act of love toward the people who care about you. Third question. If you knew with absolute certainty that no one was judging you, that everyone was too preoccupied with their own insecurities to pay attention to your flaws, that your mistakes would be forgotten within days, how would you actually live differently? This is the real one. This is the question that shows you what's actually possible. Not theoretically, but practically. Because the answer to this question is not a fantasy. It's not an impossible dream. It's your actual potential. It's who you could actually become. It's what you could actually do. So take a moment and really imagine this. You can't fail because there's no one keeping score. You can't disappoint anyone because no one is paying close enough attention. You can't be permanently judged because everyone is too focused on their own stuff. You're completely free from the scrutiny of others. Now, what changes? What do you do differently? What do you say that you're currently keeping silent? What do you attempt that you're currently avoiding? What do you build? What do you create? What do you risk? What do you express? Who do you become? The answer to this question is not fantasy. It's your actual potential. It's the version of yourself that's waiting to emerge the moment you stop giving power to people's judgment. Everything you imagine in response to this question is actually available to you, right now. The only thing standing between you and that person is the decision to stop waiting for permission. These three questions are your bridge. They're the place where understanding becomes action, where knowledge becomes transformation, where you stop being someone who knows about freedom and start being someone who actually practices it. Answer them, write them down, sit with them, because your honest answers to these three questions will tell you everything you need to know about where you actually stand, and they'll show you exactly where to begin. The cage was never locked. You've just been holding the door closed. Stop waiting. Start moving. The only permission you've ever needed was the one you're about to give yourself.